The silence was what terrified Marin Castellanos most. Not the groans of the infected that sometimes drifted through the abandoned streets, not the constant gnawing of hunger in her belly, but the absolute absence of human voices in a world that once hummed with conversation. She crouched behind the rusted husk of an overturned delivery truck, her fingers trembling as she gripped the crowbar that had become her closest companion. 3 years into the collapse, and she still hadn't grown accustomed to the quiet. The pharmacy across the street looked promising. Its windows were surprisingly intact, though that could mean either untouched supplies or a trap waiting to spring. Marin studied the building through narrowed eyes, searching for any sign of movement. The October wind scattered dried leaves across the cracked pavement, their rustling the only sound in the desolate commercial district of what had once been Portland, Maine. She'd traveled far from her home in New Mexico, following rumors of a sanctuary that never materialized, and now found herself stranded in unfamiliar territory as winter approached. A flash of movement in her peripheral vision made her freeze. A young man, perhaps in his early 20s, emerged from an alley 2 blocks down. He moved with the cautious grace of someone who had learned to survive, his dark hair pulled back in a practical knot, a makeshift spear held ready in his hands. Marin's heart raced as she watched him approach the same pharmacy she'd been eyeing. Other survivors were unpredictable, some became the best allies you could hope for, others were more dangerous than the infected themselves. The man stopped at the pharmacy's entrance, testing the door carefully. Locked. He glanced around, and for a moment, Marin thought he'd spotted her hiding place. Instead, he moved to the side window and began working on prying it open. She faced a choice: remain hidden and potentially lose whatever supplies lay inside, or reveal herself and risk confrontation. Before she could decide, a low moan echoed from somewhere nearby. The man froze, his head snapping toward the sound. Marin saw them then, 3 infected stumbling around the corner a block away, their grotesque forms silhouetted against the gray afternoon sky. They moved with that characteristic jerky gait, drawn by some invisible signal toward the living. The man saw them too and increased his efforts on the window, but the infected had already spotted him, their moans growing louder as they shambled faster. Marin cursed under her breath. She could let him die, wait for the infected to finish with him and move on, then take what she needed from the pharmacy. It would be the smart choice, the safe choice. But as she watched him struggle with the window while glancing back at the approaching horde, she saw something in his movements that reminded her of her younger brother, Carlos, lost in the early days of the outbreak. That same determined tilt of the head, that refusal to give up even when hope seemed lost. Without fully understanding why, Marin broke cover. She ran toward the nearest infected, her boots pounding against the pavement. The creature turned toward her, its milky eyes fixing on her with hungry recognition. She swung the crowbar with practiced efficiency, the metal connecting with its skull with a sickening crunch. The infected crumpled, but the other 2 were now moving toward her, giving the man precious seconds. "Get inside," she shouted, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I'll hold them." The man hesitated for only a moment before redoubling his efforts. The window gave way with a crash of breaking glass as Marin faced the remaining 2 infected. She dodged the grasping hands of the nearest one, bringing her crowbar down on its knee. It collapsed forward, and she finished it with another strike to the head. The third one was faster, managing to grab her jacket sleeve before she could react. "Here." The man's voice cut through her panic. Something flew through the air, and instinctively she caught it, a length of metal pipe. Together, they brought down the final infected. In the sudden quiet that followed, Marin and the stranger stood facing each other, breathing hard, weapons ready, neither quite sure whether they'd just found salvation or sentenced themselves to a different kind of death. The man's name was Desmond Okafor, and he spoke with the careful precision of someone who weighed each word before releasing it into the world. Inside the pharmacy, surrounded by surprisingly well-stocked shelves, Marin watched him methodically fill his backpack with antibiotics and bandages. He moved with purpose, ignoring the candy and magazines, focusing only on necessities. It told her he'd been surviving alone for a while, that he understood priorities. "You didn't have to help me," Desmond said without looking up from his task. His accent carried hints of something foreign, though years in America had smoothed most of it away. "But I'm grateful you did." Marin shrugged, examining a bottle of pain medication before pocketing it. "Seemed like the thing to do." She paused, then added, "I'm Marin." "Desmond." He finally met her eyes, and she saw intelligence there, along with a bone-deep weariness she recognized in her own reflection. "Are you alone?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Admitting to being alone made you vulnerable, but claiming to have a group could be seen as either a deterrent or an invitation to violence. Marin decided on honesty. "Yes." "You?" "For the past 8 months. He zipped his backpack closed and stood. "Before that, I was with a community in Boston. It fell apart. People turned on each other over resources." His jaw tightened at the memory. "The infected didn't destroy it. We did that ourselves." Marin understood that kind of loss. She'd seen settlements collapse from internal rot more often than external threats. "I'm heading north," she said, changing the subject. "Heard rumors about a place in Canada, near the border. Supposed to be organized, safe." Desmond's expression grew skeptical. "I've chased plenty of rumors. They usually end in disappointment or death." "Maybe," Marin conceded. "But winter's coming, and I'd rather die chasing hope than freeze to death in some abandoned building." Before Desmond could respond, a sound from outside made them both freeze. Voices. Human voices, multiple speakers engaged in conversation. Marin moved to the window, peering carefully through a gap in the newspaper someone had taped over the glass. A group of 5 people moved down the street, armed with a mixture of guns and makeshift weapons. They wore matching red bandanas around their arms. "Marauders," Desmond whispered, coming up beside her. "I've seen groups like that before. They take what they want, kill anyone who resists." The group stopped directly in front of the pharmacy. A woman with short-cropped platinum hair and a rifle slung over her shoulder examined the broken window. "Someone's been here recently," she called out. "Blood still fresh from those infected we saw down the block." Marin's hand tightened on her crowbar. They were trapped. The pharmacy had a back exit, but it opened into an alley that would funnel them straight into a dead end. The front was the only viable escape route, and that meant going through or around the marauders. "We could wait them out," Desmond suggested quietly. "They might move on." But the platinum-haired woman was already gesturing to 2 of her companions. "Check inside. Whoever it was might still be here, and they might have supplies we can use." Marin looked at Desmond, seeing her own grim calculation reflected in his face. Fighting was risky, especially when outnumbered. But allowing themselves to be discovered might be worse. She'd heard stories of what some groups did to survivors they captured, stories that made death by infected seem merciful. "The basement," Desmond hissed, pointing to a door marked "Employees Only" at the back of the pharmacy. "It might have another exit, or at least somewhere to hide." They moved silently, slipping through the door just as the front entrance rattled with someone testing the lock. The basement stairs descended into darkness, and Marin hesitated only a moment before plunging down, Desmond close behind. The door at the top opened just as they reached the bottom, and they heard boots on the floor above. The basement was cramped and musty, filled with boxes of expired merchandise and old shelving. A single small window at ground level let in feeble gray light. Desmond immediately began searching for an exit while Marin positioned herself at the base of the stairs, crowbar ready. Above them, footsteps creaked across the floorboards. "Nothing up here but supplies," a male voice called out. "Grab what you can carry." "Check everywhere," the platinum-haired woman responded. "I want to know where whoever broke in went." Marin's pulse hammered in her ears. The basement door was obvious, it would only be a matter of time before someone opened it. She looked at Desmond, who had found what he was searching for, a coal chute, probably original to the building's construction, leading up to the outside. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a person, and the metal door at its top was padlocked from the outside. "Can you break it?" Marin whispered. Desmond examined the chute, then shook his head. Not without making noise. Above them, the basement door creaked open. Footsteps descended the stairs slowly, deliberately. Marin pressed herself against the wall beside the staircase, crowbar raised, her breath coming in shallow, controlled draws. Desmond had retreated behind a stack of cardboard boxes, his spear held ready. The beam of a flashlight swept across the basement floor, creating dancing shadows that seemed to mock their attempts at concealment. "Just checking down here," the male voice from earlier called up. "Probably nothing but rats." The man reached the bottom step, and Marin could see him clearly now, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a leather jacket that had seen better days. He swept the flashlight in a slow arc, and she knew it was only seconds before the beam found her. In that frozen moment, she thought of Carlos again, remembered the last time she'd seen him, remembered the choice she'd made to run instead of fight. She'd lived with that regret for 3 years. She wasn't going to run again. Marin stepped forward and swung the crowbar at the flashlight, connecting with the man's hand. He cried out, the flashlight clattering to the floor, plunging them into near darkness. She followed up with another swing, but he was faster than she'd anticipated, catching the crowbar's shaft and yanking her forward. They grappled, crashing into the shelving, sending boxes tumbling. "Down here," the man shouted. "They're in the basement." Desmond emerged from hiding, driving his spear toward the man's legs. The man released Marin to dodge, giving her the opening she needed. She brought the crowbar down hard, catching him across the shoulder. He crumpled with a groan, and Desmond was already moving, grabbing the fallen flashlight and heading for the stairs. "Come on," he urged. Marin hesitated, looking at the injured man writhing on the floor. She could finish it, make sure he didn't follow. But the sound of footsteps thundering overhead made the decision for her. She ran after Desmond, taking the stairs 2 at a time. They burst into the pharmacy's main floor to find the platinum-haired woman and another marauder between them and the exit. The woman's rifle came up, but Desmond threw the flashlight at her face. She ducked, and in that moment of distraction, Marin charged. She hit the woman low, tackling her into a display of vitamins that exploded across the floor in a cascade of plastic bottles. The second marauder, a younger man with a scarred face, grabbed Desmond from behind. They struggled, crashing into the pharmacy counter. Marin rolled away from the platinum-haired woman, who was reaching for her rifle. A gunshot boomed in the confined space, deafeningly loud, and Marin felt the bullet pass close enough to feel its heat. She scrambled behind a shelving unit as another shot rang out, pulverizing a bottle of cough syrup above her head. Desmond broke free from the scarred man's grip, delivering an elbow to his face. The man staggered back, blood streaming from his nose. "Go!" Desmond shouted to Marin. "Out the window." She didn't need to be told twice. Marin sprinted for the broken window they'd used to enter, diving through just as another gunshot cracked behind her. She hit the pavement hard, rolling, and came up running. Desmond crashed through the window moments later, landing more gracefully. They ran together through the maze of abandoned vehicles and debris-strewn streets, the shouts of the marauders echoing behind them. Marin's lungs burned, her legs screaming in protest, but fear drove her forward. They turned down an alley, vaulted over a chain-link fence, and kept running. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only minutes, Desmond pulled her into an open doorway of what had once been a bookstore. They pressed themselves against the wall, gasping for air, listening for pursuit. The city around them was quiet except for their ragged breathing. "We need to leave Portland," Desmond said once he'd caught his breath. "That group will be looking for us." Marin nodded, still too winded to speak. She checked herself for injuries and found only bruises and scrapes. Remarkably, they'd both escaped relatively unscathed. North, she finally managed. Still heading north. That rumor you mentioned, Desmond said, meeting her eyes. About Canada. How reliable is your source? Met a guy in New Hampshire 2 months ago. Said he'd been there, that it was real. A walled community with electricity, gardens, livestock. But he'd left. Why would anyone leave a place like that? He said they had rules. Strict ones. He couldn't live with them. Marin shrugged. But rules sound better than anarchy to me. Desmond was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. Okay. I'll go north with you. 2 people have a better chance than 1. They shook on it, and as their hands clasped, Marin felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, the fragile beginning of trust. In a world where human connection often led to betrayal and pain, choosing to rely on someone was an act of courage bordering on foolishness. But as they prepared to leave the bookstore and venture back into the dangerous unknown, she decided that maybe foolishness was just another word for hope. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the ruined city in shades of orange and purple. They moved through the growing shadows like ghosts, 2 survivors bound together by necessity and the desperate belief that somewhere, something better waited. 2 days of cautious travel brought Marin and Desmond to the outskirts of Brunswick, a small town whose main street showed signs of having been thoroughly scavenged long ago. They'd been following Route 1 north, avoiding the highway where larger groups tended to patrol. The October cold had intensified, and Marin's breath formed visible clouds in the early morning air. They hadn't encountered the marauders from Portland, but both remained vigilant, taking turns keeping watch at night. The church appeared like a promise on the horizon, its white steeple somehow still intact despite years of neglect. Churches were risky, they often served as gathering places for survivors, which meant potential conflict. But they also offered sturdy walls and sometimes unopened storage rooms. As they approached, Desmond pointed out something unusual, smoke rising from the chimney. Someone's living here, he said quietly, his hand moving to his spear. Marin studied the building. The grounds were oddly well maintained, the walkway cleared of debris, the front steps swept clean. Could be a trap. Or could be someone who just wants to be left alone. Desmond moved closer, studying the windows. I don't see any fortifications. No lookouts. A sound from inside the church made them both tense, singing. A young voice, clear and sweet, carrying through the quiet morning. The song was old, something Marin vaguely recognized from before the collapse, when her mother used to play music on Sunday mornings. That's a child, Marin breathed. The singing stopped abruptly. A moment later, the church door cracked open, and a girl of perhaps 14 peered out. She had sharp features framed by auburn hair gathered in 2 long braids, and her hazel eyes studied them with unsettling intensity. You're not infected, she stated matter-of-factly. I can tell. The infected don't move like you do. We're not here to hurt you, Marin said, lowering her crowbar slightly. We're just passing through. The girl tilted her head, considering this. I'm Thessaly Kovac. This is my church. She spoke with peculiar formality, as if reciting lines from a script. Are you hungry? I have soup. Marin and Desmond exchanged glances. The offer was suspicious in its generosity, but the smell of cooking food that wafted through the open door was almost impossible to resist. They hadn't had a hot meal in days. Why would you share your food with strangers? Desmond asked, his skepticism evident. Thessaly's expression didn't change. Because that's what people used to do. Before. My grandmother taught me that hospitality was sacred. She opened the door wider. But if you're going to hurt me, you should know I have traps set throughout the building. I might die, but you'll die too. The casual way she delivered this threat, in the same tone she'd offered soup, sent a chill down Marin's spine. This child had been alone too long, had learned to survive in ways that had carved away parts of her humanity. Yet something in Thessaly's eyes spoke of a desperate loneliness beneath the hard exterior. "We won't hurt you," Marin said softly. "I promise." Inside, the church was surprisingly cozy. Thessaly had converted the vestry into living quarters, with blankets arranged near a small fireplace where a pot of soup bubbled. Books were stacked everywhere, religious texts, novels, encyclopedias, creating makeshift walls and furniture. The girl moved among them with practiced ease, ladling soup into chipped bowls. "I've been here for a year and a half," Thessaly said as they ate. The soup was thin but warm, made from canned vegetables and some kind of preserved meat. "My grandmother and I came here when our settlement fell. She died last winter. Pneumonia." She said this without emotion, as if reporting the weather. "You've been alone since then?" Marin asked gently. "I prefer it. People are unpredictable. Books are reliable." Thessaly gestured to her collection. "I've read most of these 3 times. Some of them more." Desmond set down his empty bowl. "Thessaly, winter's coming. You can't survive here alone through another winter. Come north with us. There's supposed to be a community." "I know about the community," Thessaly interrupted. "The Eden settlement, they call it. On the Canadian border, near a place called Madawaska." She pointed to a map spread across a pew, marked with notations in careful handwriting. "I've been tracking it. Listening to radio chatter." Marin moved closer to the map, her heart racing. "You have a radio? It works?" "Ham radio. My grandmother was an operator before everything fell apart. She taught me." Thessaly led them to the choir loft, where an impressive setup of radio equipment sat powered by a series of car batteries connected to solar panels visible through the window. "I listen every day. The Eden settlement broadcasts on specific frequencies, giving location information for survivors. They're real." For the first time since the collapse began, Marin felt the sharp edge of genuine hope. "Have you contacted them?" "No." Thessaly's face closed off. "I told you, I prefer being alone." "You're 14, Desmond said, not unkindly. What happens when you run out of food? Or when raiders find this place?" "I have contingencies." Thessaly's jaw set stubbornly. "I can take care of myself." Marin recognized the defensive posture, the fierce independence born from loss and betrayal. She'd felt the same way after Carlos died, after she'd watched her parents turn on each other over a can of beans. But she'd also learned that absolute isolation was just another form of death. "Your grandmother wouldn't want you to die here alone," Marin said quietly. Thessaly's composure cracked, just for a moment. Her eyes glistened, and she turned away sharply. "Don't talk about her. You didn't know her." "You're right. I didn't." Marin moved closer, but didn't touch the girl. "But I had a brother. His name was Carlos. He was only 16 when the infection hit. I left him behind because I was scared, and he died alone. I think about that every single day." The church fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Thessaly stood rigid, her back to them, her fists clenched at her sides. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and broken. "She made me promise to survive." Those were her last words. "Survive, Thessaly. No matter what." "And you have," Marin said. "You've survived beautifully. But surviving and living aren't the same thing." Thessaly turned around, and tears were streaming down her young face. "I'm scared," she whispered. "What if the settlement isn't real? What if it's just another lie?" Desmond knelt down to her level. "Then at least you won't die wondering. And you won't die alone." The girl stood there, trembling, caught between the safety of her isolation and the terrifying possibility of hope. Finally, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and nodded. "Okay. I'll come with you. But we take the radio equipment. And some of my books." As they spent the rest of the day preparing for departure, Maren watched Thessaly move through the church, touching familiar objects with reverent fingers, saying silent goodbyes. The girl packed her grandmother's belongings with care: a worn Bible, photographs, a silver locket. Each item was a piece of the life she was leaving behind. That night, as they prepared to sleep before setting out at dawn, Thessaly approached Maren hesitantly. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me about your brother. It helped." Maren pulled the girl into a gentle hug, and Thessaly didn't pull away. They stayed like that for a long moment, two survivors sharing the weight of their grief, and for the first time in years, Maren felt the stirring of something maternal, a purpose beyond mere survival. Tomorrow they would leave the church and continue north, 3 instead of 2, carrying their collective hopes toward an uncertain future. The abandoned elementary school seemed like the perfect place to wait out the rainstorm that had caught them on the road. 6 days had passed since leaving Brunswick, and they'd made good progress despite having to move at a pace suitable for Thessaly's shorter legs. The girl had proven surprisingly resilient, never complaining about the cold or the long hours of walking, though Maren noticed her exhaustion in the way she stumbled occasionally over obstacles she would have easily avoided when fresh. They'd crossed into a region Thessaly's map identified as Lincoln County when the rain began, heavy and cold, promising to soak them to the bone if they didn't find shelter. The school's main entrance had been barricaded from the inside, but Desmond found a window they could jimmy open. As they climbed through into what had once been a kindergarten classroom, Maren felt the familiar unease of entering an unknown space. Children's artwork still decorated the walls, faded and water-damaged but recognizable: crayon drawings of families, houses with triangle roofs, smiling suns. The images felt like ghosts of a world that would never return, innocent remnants of the before time. Thessaly moved among them silently, her face unreadable. "We should clear the building," Desmond said, ever practical. "Make sure we're alone." They moved through the school in careful formation, Desmond leading, Maren at the rear, Thessaly protected between them. Most classrooms were empty, disturbed only by weather damage and the passage of time. But in the cafeteria, they found evidence of recent habitation: sleeping bags arranged in a corner, empty food containers, and most concerning, fresh footprints in the dust. "Someone's been here," Maren whispered. "Recently." A sound from behind made them all spin around. A woman stood in the cafeteria doorway, so thin she seemed almost skeletal, holding a kitchen knife in a trembling hand. Her clothes hung off her frame, and her eyes had the fevered brightness of illness or starvation. "Please," she croaked. "Don't hurt us." "Us." Maren caught the plural just as a small child, no more than 5 years old, peered around the woman's legs. The boy had the same hollow-cheeked look, the same desperate hunger evident in every line of his tiny body. "We're not here to hurt anyone," Maren said, lowering her crowbar. "We're just sheltering from the rain." The woman swayed on her feet, and Desmond moved forward to steady her. "When did you last eat?" he asked. 3 days ago. Maybe 4. The woman's voice was barely audible. "We've been searching for food, but everything's been picked clean." Thessaly was already digging into her backpack, pulling out one of their precious protein bars. She handed it to the little boy, who grabbed it with shocking ferocity, tearing open the wrapper with his teeth. "Slow down," Thessaly said gently. "You'll make yourself sick." They moved the woman and child to the sleeping bags and shared what food they could spare. The woman's name was Priya Deshmukh, and the boy was her nephew, Corbin. She told her story between small, careful bites of crackers. They'd been part of a larger group heading south to escape the winter, but the group had fractured after a disagreement over resources. Priya and Corbin had been abandoned because, as she put it, a sick woman and a small child slow everyone down. "The infection?" Maren asked carefully. "No. Just a respiratory infection. It's getting better. Priya coughed as if to contradict herself. We just need food, strength to keep moving. They stayed in the cafeteria as rain drummed against the windows and daylight faded. Desmond built a small fire in a metal trash can, using broken furniture for fuel. Thessaly used her radio to scan frequencies, hoping for any information about conditions ahead. Corbin fell asleep almost immediately after eating, his small body finally relaxing after what must have been days of constant fear. You should come with us, Marin found herself saying. To the Eden settlement. Priya shook her head slowly. We'll just slow you down. You've already shared food you can't spare. I won't ask for more than that. You're not asking. I'm offering. Marin surprised herself with the vehemence in her voice. She looked at Corbin's sleeping form, so vulnerable, so dependent. No child should be out here like this. Desmond caught her eye, and she saw concern there. They were already pushing their resources by adding Thessaly to their group. 2 more mouths to feed, one of them sick, would significantly reduce their chances of reaching the settlement before winter truly set in. It was a risk, possibly a fatal one. But as Marin looked at the boy, she thought again of Carlos, of how he'd needed her and how she'd failed him. Maybe she couldn't change the past, but she could choose differently now. We stay together, she said firmly. All of us. Thessaly looked up from the radio, and Marin saw approval in the girl's eyes. Desmond sighed but nodded. Priya began to cry, tears streaming down her gaunt face. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. That night, Marin took first watch while the others slept. She sat in the cafeteria doorway, crowbar across her lap, listening to the rain and thinking about the nature of survival. For so long, she'd believed that survival meant hardness, meant making brutal calculations about who deserved to live and who didn't. But maybe true survival, the kind worth achieving, required something else entirely, the willingness to carry each other's burdens, even when logic said to walk away. A sound in the hallway snapped her to attention. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with purpose. Marin stood slowly, gripping her weapon, her heart racing. Shadows appeared in the darkness beyond her position, and then a light blazed to life, blinding her. Well, a familiar voice said, and Marin's blood ran cold. It was the platinum-haired woman from Portland, flanked by 4 others, all armed with guns. Looks like we finally caught up with you. The standoff lasted only seconds before Desmond appeared at Marin's side, his spear raised despite the guns pointed at them. Behind them, Marin heard Thessaly gathering Priya and Corbin, moving them to the corner where they'd be less exposed. The girl's survival instincts were sharp, honed by months of living alone. We don't want trouble, Marin said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. We're just passing through. The platinum-haired woman, she'd heard one of her companions call her Kovacs during the Portland confrontation, smiled without warmth. You nearly killed one of my people. Broke his collarbone. That's not nothing. You shot at us first, Desmond pointed out. Because you were stealing our supplies. Kovacs moved closer, her rifle trained on Marin's chest. In the flickering firelight from the trash can, her face looked harsh, all sharp angles and harder edges. Everything in that pharmacy belonged to us. We'd already scouted it. There weren't any markings, Marin countered. No way to know. And now you're traveling with more people. Building your own little family. Kovac's gaze swept over Thessaly, Priya, and Corbin. That's touching. Really. But it doesn't change what you owe us. One of Kovac's men, the scarred one Desmond had fought in the pharmacy, stepped forward. Let me handle them, Annabelle. They've caused enough problems. Annabelle Kovacs held up a hand, stopping him. I'm not interested in killing. Not when they might be useful. She focused on Marin. You're heading north. So are we. There's supposed to be a settlement up there, organized and well-stocked. The Eden settlement, Thessaly said quietly from her corner. All eyes turned to her. That's where you're going. Kovac's expression sharpened with interest. You know about it? I've been monitoring their radio broadcasts. I know exactly where it is, and I know how to contact them for safe entry. Thessaly's voice was calm, but Marin could see the calculation in her eyes. The girl was negotiating, using information as currency. Thessaly, Marin started, but the girl cut her off. I'll tell you everything I know, give you my maps and radio codes. In exchange, you let us go. Let us all go. Kovacs considered this, then shook her head. Not good enough. You could be lying. We'd get to the settlement and find nothing, while you'd be long gone. She made a decision, visible in the way her posture shifted. Here's my counter-offer, you come with us. All of you. Guide us to the settlement using your information. Once we're there and verified it's real, you're free to go. And if we refuse? Desmond asked. The scarred man raised his rifle pointedly. Then we take the radio equipment and the girl, and leave the rest of you for the infected. Marin felt rage building in her chest, hot and consuming. After everything they'd survived, everything they'd endured, to be trapped like this felt impossibly cruel. She thought about fighting, about the chances they'd have in close quarters against people with guns. The math was brutal, they'd all likely die, especially little Corbin, who'd done nothing wrong except have the misfortune of being born into a dying world. We'll do it, she heard herself say. We'll guide you. Marin, no, Desmond protested, but she silenced him with a look. We don't have a choice. They broke camp as the rain began to taper off, moving through the pre-dawn darkness with Kovacs' group surrounding them like guards escorting prisoners. Annabelle Kovacs walked beside Thessaly, asking questions about the settlement while the girl answered in clipped, minimal responses. Priya carried Corbin, who had woken crying and confused. The woman still looked ill, her breathing labored, but she pushed forward without complaint. As they walked, Marin found herself next to the scarred man. Up close, she could see his scars were old, predating the collapse. You don't seem like the raider type, she said quietly. He laughed bitterly. What's the raider type? We're just people trying to survive, same as you. By threatening children? By taking what others have worked for? By doing what's necessary. His expression hardened. Don't act morally superior. I saw how you moved in that pharmacy, how you fought. You're a survivor, which means you've done things you're not proud of too. He wasn't wrong. Marin had stolen, lied, abandoned people who needed help because helping would have endangered her. She'd crossed lines she'd once thought were uncrossable. But she'd also chosen to help Desmond, to take in Thessaly, to protect Priya and Corbin. Somewhere along the way, she'd decided that surviving at the cost of her humanity wasn't surviving at all. My name's Garrett, the scarred man said suddenly. Garrett Rousseau. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry it has to be this way. They traveled through the day, stopping only briefly for water and rest. The group dynamic was tense, with Kovacs' people maintaining constant vigilance. Marin noticed they were professional about it, disciplined, taking turns on watch, sharing their rations fairly among themselves. These weren't mindless thugs, they were organized survivors who'd simply chosen a different path. By evening, they'd reached the remains of a small town Thessaly's map identified as Waldoboro. Kovacs called for camp in what had once been a fire station, its garage bay doors still intact enough to provide shelter. As they settled in, Marin watched Thessaly set up her radio equipment under Annabelle's watchful eye. Can you really contact them? Kovacs asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. I've never tried, Thessaly admitted. But I know the frequencies, the call signs. My grandmother wrote everything down before she died. The girl's hands moved with practiced efficiency over the equipment. The question isn't whether I can contact them. It's whether they'll respond. She began broadcasting, her young voice carrying across the airwaves with coordinates and a request for information. For long minutes, there was only static. Then, crackling through the interference, a voice responded. "This is Eden Settlement. Identify yourself." The entire group went silent. Even Kovacs seemed to hold her breath. Thessaly's hands trembled slightly as she keyed the microphone. "This is Thessaly Kovac, broadcasting from Waldoboro. Requesting confirmation of settlement location and entry protocols." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Thessaly Kovac, we copy. How many in your party?" Thessaly looked at Kovacs, who nodded. 9 total. Mixed ages, no infected. What are your intentions? We're seeking refuge. We're prepared to contribute to the community. The voice on the other end shifted, became more personal. Thessaly, this is Commander Ryan Caldecott. I'm going to be straight with you. We're accepting refugees, but we have strict entry requirements. Everyone must submit to medical screening. Everyone must agree to our laws. We've had problems with raiders, with people who want to take what we've built rather than contribute to it. Can you guarantee your group will abide by our terms? Kovacs leaned forward, speaking before Thessaly could respond. This is Annabelle Kovacs. I'm leading this group. We'll follow your terms. There was a long silence. Then Commander Caldecott's voice returned, noticeably cooler. Annabelle Kovacs. We've heard reports about you and your people. You've been operating between Portland and Augusta, taking supplies from settlements, threatening survivors. Lies, Kovacs said sharply. We take what we need to survive. That's not a crime in this world. It is in ours. The commander's voice was firm. I'm going to be clear, Ms. Kovacs. You and anyone who's been part of your raiding activities are not welcome at Eden Settlement. However, if there are members of your current group who were coerced, who want to separate from you and seek refuge, we'll accept them. The fire station erupted in tension. Kovacs stood abruptly, her face flushed with anger. We risked everything to get here. You can't just turn us away. I can and I will. Our settlement thrives because we maintain standards, because we reject the brutality that's consumed the rest of the world. Commander Caldecott paused. For anyone listening who wants to leave Kovacs' group, head north on Route 1. 20 miles past the Canadian border, you'll see markers directing you to our outer checkpoint. Come alone or in small groups, arrive during daylight, and you'll be processed for entry. And the rest of us? Kovacs demanded. Find somewhere else. Eden isn't for you. The radio went silent. Kovacs stared at the equipment, her jaw working with suppressed rage. Then, with shocking speed, she drew her pistol and pointed it at Thessaly's head. Get them back on the line. Tell them you made a mistake, that I'm not who they think I am. Don't do this, Marin said, stepping forward despite Garrett's rifle swinging toward her. She's just a kid. She's leverage. Kovacs' eyes were wild now, desperate. I didn't come all this way to be rejected. My people deserve safety too. Desmond moved with the speed of desperation, his spear flashing in the dim light. He knocked Kovacs' gun arm upward just as she fired. The bullet went wild, ricocheting off the ceiling. Chaos erupted. Garrett fired at Desmond but missed, hitting equipment instead. Marin threw herself at Kovacs, bearing the woman to the ground as Thessaly scrambled away. More gunshots cracked through the confined space. Priya screamed, sheltering Corbin with her body. 2 of Kovacs' people rushed toward the garage doors, apparently deciding that escape was preferable to a firefight. Garrett stood frozen, his rifle lowered, and Marin realized he deliberately missed his shot at Desmond. Enough! Garrett shouted. It's over, Annabelle. It's over. Kovacs struggled beneath Marin's weight, still trying to reach her dropped pistol. "Traitor," she spat at Garrett. "After everything we've been through. You crossed a line," Garrett said quietly. "You pointed a gun at a child." One of the remaining members of Kovacs' group, a woman Marin didn't recognize, slowly lowered her weapon. "Garrett's right. This isn't who we're supposed to be." The fight drained out of Kovacs. She stopped struggling, and Marin cautiously released her. The woman sat up, her platinum hair disheveled, her face a mask of devastation. "I just wanted my people to survive," she whispered. "I tried so hard to keep everyone alive." "By terrorizing others," Desmond said. He was bleeding from a graze on his arm but otherwise seemed unharmed. "That's not survival. That's just spreading the infection of cruelty." Garrett helped Kovacs to her feet. "We're leaving, Annabelle. Anyone who wants to come with us, who wants to keep trying to find somewhere that'll take us, you're welcome. But anyone who wants to try for Eden settlement, I won't stop you." The group fractured. Kovacs left with only one loyal follower, disappearing into the darkness without another word. Garrett and the woman stayed behind, along with one other man who'd been quiet throughout the entire confrontation. "We want to try for the settlement," Garrett said to Marin. "If you'll let us travel with you." "I know we don't have any right to ask." Marin looked at Desmond, then at Thessaly, reading the decision in their faces. They were all thinking the same thing. These people had held them at gunpoint, had threatened them. But they'd also walked away from Kovacs, had chosen a different path when given the choice. "You can come," Marin finally said. "But the first sign of trouble, and we part ways." Garrett nodded, relief evident on his scarred face. "That's fair." As they settled in for the night, maintaining careful distance from their new traveling companions, Marin felt the weight of all that had happened. They'd found confirmation that Eden was real, but the path there was still dangerous, still uncertain. And now they were 8 instead of 5, a larger group that would be harder to move quietly. But as she watched Thessaly carefully pack her radio equipment and saw Priya holding Corbin close, as she met Desmond's steady gaze across the fire, she realized something important: the settlement wasn't just a destination anymore. It represented something larger, a possibility that people could choose to be better, could create something worth protecting in the ruins of the old world. Tomorrow they would continue north, toward Canada, toward hope. And whatever waited there, they would face it together. The Canadian border was nothing like Marin remembered from before. No customs stations, no friendly officers checking passports, just a faded sign reading "Bienvenue au Canada" riddled with bullet holes and half covered in frost. They'd been traveling for 12 days since Waldoboro, moving through increasingly harsh weather as October bled into November. The group had settled into an uneasy rhythm, Garrett and his 2 companions maintaining respectful distance while proving useful in hunting and scouting. Priya's condition had worsened despite their careful rationing of antibiotics from their dwindling medical supplies. She now leaned heavily on Garrett's shoulder as they walked, her breathing labored and wheezing. Corbin, sensing his aunt's decline, had grown quieter, his usual 5-year-old energy suppressed by fear and grief. Marin saw her own past reflected in the boy's eyes, the helpless terror of watching someone you loved slip away. "We're close," Thessaly announced, consulting her map against the GPS coordinates Commander Caldecott had provided during their second radio contact. "Maybe 5 miles. 5 miles. After thousands of miles of wandering, of searching, of surviving, they were 5 miles from a place that promised safety. Marin felt the hope rising in her chest and fought to suppress it. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to crushing disappointment. But when they crested the final hill and saw it spread before them in the valley below, hope became impossible to deny. The Eden settlement was real. Massive walls constructed from shipping containers and reinforced concrete enclosed what looked like several acres. Guard towers stood at regular intervals, and Marin could see the glint of solar panels covering every available roof. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys. Gardens, protected by greenhouse structures, showed the green of growing things. Beyond the walls, she could hear sounds she'd almost forgotten: children laughing, the clang of metal on metal from what might be a blacksmith's forge, voices raised in conversation rather than fear. "Oh my God," Desmond breathed. "It's actually real." They approached slowly, hands visible and empty of weapons. As they drew closer, figures appeared on the walls, guards with rifles, watching their approach with professional caution. When they reached the outer checkpoint, a heavy gate in the wall opened, and a woman emerged flanked by armed soldiers. Commander Ryan Caldecott was tall and lean, her dark skin weathered by years of outdoor living, her hair gathered in tight rows of braids. She wore military fatigues that had been modified and repaired countless times, and carried herself with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Her eyes swept over the group, assessing, calculating. "Thessaly Kovac?" she asked. The girl stepped forward. "That's me. You kept your word about Annabelle Kovacs. Our scouts reported that her group split, that she headed west." Caldecott's gaze moved to the others. "These are your companions?" Thessaly introduced everyone, including Garrett and his people. Caldecott's expression tightened when she heard Garrett's name, and one of her soldiers whispered something in her ear. "Garrett Rousseau. You were with Kovacs when she raided the settlement at Augusta. You were identified as one of the shooters." Garrett's face went pale, but he didn't deny it. "Yes, ma'am. I was. I'm not proud of it. I was." He stopped, started again. "There's no excuse. I did it. If you're going to turn me away or arrest me, I understand." Caldecott studied him for a long moment. "Our settlement has laws. Justice that applies to everyone. If you enter, you'll face a tribunal for your actions. They'll decide whether you're to be imprisoned, exiled, or given a chance at redemption through service. Do you accept those terms?" "I do." "Then you may enter. The same goes for your companions." Caldecott looked at the woman and man with Garrett, who nodded their acceptance. The medical screening took hours. They were examined in a clean facility with actual running water and electricity, tested for infection, their wounds treated by people with real medical training. Priya was immediately taken to what Caldecott called the infirmary, Corbin clutching at her hand and crying until Marin promised to stay with him. As sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, they gathered in what served as the settlement's commons, a large open area with wooden tables and a community kitchen. Hundreds of people moved through the space, talking, laughing, living. Children played a game of tag between the tables. An elderly couple sat holding hands, watching the activity with contented smiles. "It's overwhelming, isn't it?" a voice said beside Marin. She turned to find a young man about her age offering her a plate of actual hot food, vegetable stew with fresh bread. "I'm Lucien Toussaint. I've been here for 8 months. It still feels like a dream sometimes." Marin accepted the plate with trembling hands. "Does it last? This feeling? The wonder? Sometimes it fades, and you get used to having enough food, to being safe. But then you remember what it was like before, and it comes back." Lucien smiled. "You're one of Thessaly's group, right? The girl's been telling everyone who'll listen about her journey, about the people who helped her get here." Across the commons, Marin could see Thessaly sitting with a group of children, the rigid fear that had characterized her expression for so long finally softening. Desmond was deep in conversation with some of the settlement's planners, his engineer's mind already engaged with their infrastructure challenges. Garrett sat alone, his face troubled but resigned, waiting to hear his fate from the tribunal. "What happens now?" Marin asked. "After we're processed, accepted? You become part of the community. Everyone works according to their abilities. Everyone shares in what we produce. It's not perfect, we have disagreements, problems, people who don't fit. But we're trying to build something better than what was lost." Lucien paused. Commander Caldecott will want to speak with you personally, by the way. She does interviews with everyone who arrives. The interview came the next morning. Caldecott's office was in a converted shipping container, lined with maps and reports. She gestured for Marin to sit, then settled across from her with a cup of something that smelled remarkably like real coffee. "Tell me about your journey," Caldecott said. "Not just the route, but who you were when you started and who you are now." So Marin talked. She told Caldecott about Carlos, about the guilt she'd carried for 3 years. She described meeting Desmond, choosing to help him despite the risk. She spoke of finding Thessaly, of protecting Priya and Corbin, of the choices she'd made that had transformed her from a solitary survivor into someone who carried the weight of other lives. "You could have traveled faster alone," Caldecott observed. "You probably would have arrived here weeks ago, with more supplies, in better condition. Why burden yourself with others?" Marin thought about this, really thought about it. Because surviving alone isn't living. It's just postponing death. The world ended, but we're still human. We still need connection, purpose, something beyond just another day of breathing. Caldecott nodded slowly. "That's the philosophy that built this place. A lot of survivors don't understand that. They think safety is walls and guns and hoarded resources. But real safety is community, is people willing to sacrifice for each other." She leaned forward. "I'm going to be direct with you, Marin. We need people like you. People who can lead, who understand that leadership means carrying burdens, making hard choices, protecting the vulnerable. Would you be interested in joining our defense council? Training others, helping expand our patrols to bring in more survivors?" The offer was unexpected, overwhelming. Marin had spent so long just trying to survive that the idea of building something, of having purpose beyond the next meal, the next shelter, felt almost foreign. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Of course. Take your time. You've earned rest." But rest proved elusive. That afternoon, word came that Priya had pneumonia, complicated by malnutrition and exposure. Despite the settlement's medical resources, her condition was deteriorating. Marin sat with Corbin outside the infirmary, holding the boy as he cried. "Is Aunt Priya going to die like Mommy and Daddy?" he asked in a small voice. Marin's heart broke. She wanted to lie, to offer false comfort, but she'd learned that children deserve truth. "I don't know, sweetheart. The doctors are doing everything they can. She's fighting very hard. I don't want to be alone." "You won't be." Marin held him closer. "I promise you won't be alone." Priya died 3 days later, in the early hours of the morning, peacefully in her sleep. They held a funeral in the settlement cemetery, a carefully tended plot where the dead were honored with wooden markers and planted trees. Corbin stood between Marin and Desmond, his small hand gripped tight in hers, as Commander Caldecott spoke words about sacrifice and memory. After the service, Desmond pulled Marin aside. "I talked to the settlement council. Corbin needs guardians. I told them we'd do it. Both of us." He paused, suddenly uncertain. "If you're willing." Marin looked at the boy, who was being